Hello, welcome to This Podcast Cannot Continue, a podcast about video games by two friends. I'm Colin.
I'm Ben.
And if you're new around here, each episode we discuss some interesting topics and see where they take us. And at the very end, we like to cap it off with a little discussion about our backlog. So, getting right into it, Ben, I'm going to let you launch us into our first topic.
Sure, yeah. So I have been thinking about this a little bit, and I want to talk about preservation. But to be particular, I want to talk about what I think like the progression of preservation looks like.
Okay, I gotta bring this up right now. I'm just gonna jump in here. Topic 2 that I wrote down. Literally, I said retro gaming in 2021, game preservation efforts.
Oh my God.
Okay, so I think that means, once again, we're not going to hit our 4-topic episode goal because we both picked the same topic. But let's talk about it because I really wanted to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, and actually I did only bring the one topic with me today because I figured we'd probably end up talking about it for a long time. So that is actually sort of serendipitous that you have the same thing on your list. So yeah, okay.
If you want to focus on game preservation efforts, I included it in my idea about retro gaming in 2021, but we can kind of like roll those in, but have like more of a conversation on preservation first, and then kind of bleed that into.
Mine's pretty tightly based on preservation, but I touch on what it is like to retro game in 2020, because in a way those are like the sort of solutions that we have. Like that is what preservation is. That is what experiencing the fruits of preservation as they stand now means. Retro gaming in 2020 or 2021.
Yeah.
It's 2021 right now, by the way. I've forgotten already.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think sort of what we're seeing is like there's a sort of progression that leads towards a destination as hardware is aging and needing to be replaced by more like permanent solutions, right? So
sure, like aging consoles, carts running out of battery or whatever.
I think that carts running out of battery is really not a big deal.
Yeah, I've personally solved that problem for a bunch of my own carts, but that kind of thing.
There is wear and tear that occurs on carts. Like for example, what am I talking about? The connector where like a cartridge goes into a slot, right? Like that is physical wear that is being applied to that cart over time. And I mean, generally those contacts can be cleaned and kept in pretty good condition. But like when you have friction in a hypothetical, like long-term future, and to be fair, we might be talking about many times over how many times we've put in a cartridge so far. Like if we talk about a Super Nintendo game that's 20 years old, right?
Right.
It might take like 100 years for this to happen, but just to be fair, that friction could just wear the whole PCB right through at some point, someday, right? Never mind the slot. And then on top of that, things like if people aren't taking care of those batteries and not keeping them in like a nice sort of climate controlled environment, you could have battery leakage, things like that can damage other components on the carts. So yeah, carts are at risk, but I think actually right now, ironically, the greater risk is disc-based medium.
Because they just wear out even just being out in the sun.
Yeah, disc rot in general. And unfortunately, I think one of the things that we might see a lot of is, okay, so to be fair, Blu-ray discs and stuff like that are actually generally engineered in a way that's less susceptible to disc rot compared to like some of the earlier CDs, like what we're seeing on like Saturn games,
right?
Which are really bad for disc rot, as well as possibly PS1 games.
Yeah.
But even still, the PS3 game cases being like clear, transparent, I think is not actually a great situation to have a whole bunch of those on a shelf, possibly like inside of a
open window
or like daylight, sunlight, something like that. Like I you know what I mean? That for all we know, that could be accelerating disc rot. The complete sort of picture on why disc rot is happening and what you can do to prevent it seems a little bit unknown. And a lot of people believe that you could mitigate or extend the life of your disc-based games by avoiding things like too much light and whatever in their storage kind of situations. But like a lot of people think that it's just an inevitability that's going to happen either way.
Really?
Yeah. So
Is it like
with
after
that
my
in mind,
lifetime's over though? Like how? Like what is the timeline? Is there like
well,
do they know?
it's already happening.
Well,
It's already
okay.
happening, like to a lot of Saturn games in particular. Also, like older things like the Sega CD or like I think CDI games, stuff like that. Anything that's like on a CD from that kind of era.
Those are like
And
okay, but the quality of those things is way cheaper. Like Sony was giving out what like
it is happening to PS1 games also.
yeah, because the whole thing with that was like pretty much anybody like to make things for Nintendo, you had to buy their carts through their like system, right? But if you're
Yeah.
making for the Sony, it was anybody could do it, and that's why I feel like the quality of some of those discs is really cheap. Even some of the cases qualities are like they vary. They're
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of an unknown quantity, and so like we've talked about this subject a few times with like ODEs. So I think that like preservation is happening in individual steps because it's not unreasonable to want to enjoy the original hardware as a console
Right.
while we can. And in almost all of these cases, whether it's cartridge or disc-based media, it seems to be the case that the console is going to outlast the game media, right? And
sure.
so, for example, there's no reason why you can't use a Sega Saturn for like years and years and years, despite disc rot, with an ODE because those exist. So an ODE is an optical drive emulator, and it's a hardware replacement for the disc drive that lets you load your backed up games via SD card, typically. Or I don't know if there's ODEs that use some other type of storage. I think they're all SD card, basically.
There's one coming out for the PS1?
There were two
Or there is one out?
in very recent. Yeah, there were two in very recent, like in the past year that were released for the PS1. And actually, I can't remember the names of them right now. There was one at one point for the PS1 that was using like what is it, the add-on or serial port or something that's on the back of PS1 consoles. I actually never owned a PS1, so I don't exactly
actually
know
have
what it
one
is.
right here.
Yeah, so it was like passing the data through that port, which is highly unusual because the typical process for an ODE is like you literally remove the optical drive hardware and replace that with something, right? But the issue is that most of the disc-based consoles, like the disk drive is almost like a disk drive in a computer. Like it does all the work itself and then just sends the data along like a cable or a bus or something to like the CPU and all that so it can do its thing. But in the case of the PS1, all the control for the disk drive is like on the PS1 motherboard. So you can't just like replace the drive with something because like if you replace the drive with something that essentially like reads an SD card and is able to like pass all the data, like that's simple. That's why that works on something like a Saturn or a Dreamcast or something like that. But on a PS1, it doesn't just like pass all the data on a line. It's like essentially the motherboard, the PS1 motherboard and like CPU and all that stuff has all the hardware that says like point the laser here as far as I understand it, right?
Gotcha.
Like the actual controller, microcontroller or whatever it is for the disk drive is like in the PS1 motherboard. So it's been a long time coming, and there was a while where people weren't sure if like really good ones were going to happen because the one that I mentioned that connected with the serial port, it's not perfect compatibility. There's a lot of issues with that one, right? But they've made a lot of efforts, and I wish I remembered the names of the two that are more recent and more like traditional ODEs like I described where they replace the disk drive, but I didn't write them down on my notes here. Yeah, if when we publish these, if we have like footnotes or any kind of text we put under them, anything that we can't remember like that, we'll make a note of that. So on
Commitment to
top
quality.
of that though, yeah, so ODEs are kind of the first step, and I think with cartridge-based consoles like flash carts are the equivalent step there.
Yep, obviously.
And then we have like the actual consoles aging, and I think these next two sort of go hand in hand. So there's FPGA consoles and there's emulation. And emulation is sort of like, it sounds weird to say, but in a way, I don't want to say it's the be-all, end-all, because when I say that, that sounds like I'm saying it is like the absolute best way to play certain games, and obviously that's a subjective take.
In some cases, isn't it your only way to play certain games just due to availability? Yeah,
definitely. And I think emulation is really important because it like enables access to games for a lot of people. Actually, I was thinking like how many games do you think are inspired by other games that wouldn't have been able to be experienced by the creator had they not had access to that game via something like emulation in the first place?
You know what's
what I
one
mean?
example of that I think, okay, it's less true nowadays, what with Virtual Console, even starting like a ways back when it was first available and all that kind of stuff. But like, I grew up I grew up around a lot of people, both in high school and then even in university, who, for example, loved Earthbound. But even back then, North American carts of Earthbound were like, good luck, nobody had them. And I would argue that almost 100% of the people that I know who really pumped that game up to me and said it was one of their favorite experiences ever, they had never laid hands on a real cart. Mm-hmm. They had only played it through emulation. And that's not like obviously maybe even the best example of this. It's just one that stands out in my mind because it's classically, in my experience, the one sort of like holy grail white whale game that no one could get their hands on when they were a kid,
Right. Yeah.
Just because it was like retro games weren't really the same thing that they are now for collecting, and now Earthbound's even worse. But it was just one of those things that like, even Chrono Trigger got re-released on the PlayStation 1, all these classic Super Nintendo RPGs that were kind of hard to find. They were around in other forms, but Earthbound was locked to the SNES for a long time until the Virtual Console had its $10 version.
And Virtual Console even is a sort of an impermanent solution. Nintendo
exactly.
Eventually takes down the stores, and then if it's on the storage of your console, you have it. But when the store's down, if you have to wipe that console for any reason or whatever, then you don't have it. And
and for a cult game that I would say gained probably most of its following years after it actually came out from new fans, I would say the majority of those new fans interacted with that game through emulation or preservation or whatever you want to call it, because I would say that is just how that was available to them to play.
Yeah, exactly. And emulation is a key part of that. And I think that, and like even Virtual Console is based on emulation too, right? So even if they did it in a quote unquote more legit way, it's still emulation. And it's still something that I think developers kind of were put onto by like the emulation community, by retro gamers, not, I don't think any developer came up with the idea on their own to release an emulation-based product because that existed, right? Like, it's not their idea. It's their idea to license an emulator or make their own emulator or whatever to do it. But you kind of see what I'm saying? Like, who knows if they would have even arrived at that solution without the community kind of doing it first, right?
Yeah, no, I understand that. Because what we were talking about this before, the Super Mario 3D All-Stars collection runs basically Nintendo's own emulators.
Yeah. Several of the people in the Nintendo EAD division in Europe were emulator developers that were hired, stuff like that, right? So, they essentially have a team that can make emulators in-house. And then there's even cases where, like, there's SMB1 ROM that was distributed on the Wii Virtual Console, had a certain NES header that's typically associated with dumping ROMs for a certain emulator that is like a community emulator. Now, to be fair, that person who developed that system, that header system, is hired at Nintendo and was working at Nintendo at the time that Virtual Console was made for the Wii. So the speculation is a little bit mixed. It's either did the header end up on that ROM because they employed the person who like made that header system, or the prevailing sort of theory that a lot of people that got really popular because it just sounded so like intense for Nintendo, especially because they have a really like harsh disclaimer on their website saying about how bad emulation is. Or did they have to download their own ROM from a
website
funny. That was distributing it illegally in order to even be able to provide it to us, to sell it back to us?
Man, they would never tell us, even if it was.
They'll never tell us.
Yeah.
We'll never know. But a lot of people prefer to tell the story the second way. Anyway, so with that said, and just to like, so emulation I think can last forever.
In theory,
human forever, because it is made to run on like basically any kind of computer, right? So it's like, it's not designed for like a hardware that is going to like go away. But actually, if anything, the key to emulation, that like what you're really doing when you make an emulator is you're reverse engineering the console. So even if you do make an emulator for a platform that's going to go away, like, so let's say, you know, PCs are on like 64-bit x86 architecture. Let's say like a whole different type of processor comes out and we're now like redesigning all our programs because we're not even on the same type of architecture. Sure. Like the next set of emulators for that architecture are going to come way faster than the first emulator for the same console ever was made, because the hardest work involved was figuring out how the console works as you develop the emulator and learning more and more and more about it and becoming more and more accurate, right? Once like you know what I mean? Like, I think that's the reason why, for example, as soon as FPGA consoles became popular, the first thing we saw was like basically a perfect NES. And the reason why is because there was already an emulator that was basically a perfect NES. Right. So like we already knew
the groundwork was laid. Like the skill, it had the NES's genome had been decoded. All we had to do was reassemble it, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. And so therefore, I want to conclude that like FPGA consoles and emulation are sort of on the same tier for preservation.
Sure.
Because emulation will always be around, and while we have the data for emulation, FPGA consoles implementations can also always be made because it's essentially the same information, the same reverse engineering, right? Implemented in a different manner, but you have to know the same stuff about the source console to produce an emulator or an FPGA console. So I think that FPGA consoles, and so this is interesting that you said retro gaming in 2021. Yeah. Because with retro gaming in 2021, so like the current solution for FPGA consoles that's like really popular that everyone knows is stuff by Analog, right?
Right. They're fantastic. I've personally tried their products through you, and they're great.
Yeah, because I own the Super NT, and you know, actually, even recently, I've been thinking I should have bought the Mega SG, even though I know nothing about the Genesis library, because
there's some good stuff.
Now it's sold out, and I'm kind of like, was that my chance to have one? So maybe it's just FOMO. I don't know. But anyway, whatever. So
I feel like real Genesis don't go for that much, though. If you really wanted a Genesis.
Oh yeah, for sure. So here's the thing, though. The Analog consoles are all designed to use original media, right? Yeah. So like they have a cartridge slot. The upcoming Analog Duo has both the Hue cards and the disk drive for like TurboGrafx 16 and PC Engine kind of stuff like that, right?
I was unaware of that.
So you'll be able to use so you'll be able to use discs. You'll be able to use cards, which are essentially their cartridges, right? But that is like the now situation. So like I see Analog's FPGA offerings as retro gaming now.
Right. They
are an FPGA implementation, and I did just say I think FPGA is sort of like the future path when all the consoles are dead. You know, like when there's no more working Super Nintendos in the world, and there's no more working Super Nintendo carts in the world.
Don't scare me with such a world.
Then emulation is the way, or FPGA recreations. But the reason why the Super NT is now and not future is because if all the carts die before the console dies, and that's like pretty much guaranteed, then when all the carts are gone, what does the Super NT offer? Now, obviously, things like
so you're saying digital's the future, basically. It has to be something.
No. Oh. So follow along. Okay. So don't worry. I'm gonna
follow along, young one. Let me tell you a tale.
So I know you're scared about your like official carts.
Yep.
And I can't blame you because I don't have an answer for that. But what I do want to say is, there will still be, like, at least for now, there will still be flash carts. And I think that flash carts produced now are going to obviously like outlast like original game carts produced 20 years ago because they have a 20-year lead.
Yep.
And who knows, they're maybe made to this sounds kind of funny to say, maybe they're made to a higher standard, because like the original sort of like cartridges, obviously like Nintendo had standards for carts, but they're also producing to meet like a certain like price point and like a cost, this and that, right? And you pay quite a bit more for one of these flash cards, but it's like of a similar type of design. But at the same time, it's like, I don't actually know if that's a true statement. Maybe I'm saying something wrong.
Some of those old games were, I'm not sure, because like I'm pretty sure like not Chrono Trigger. Final Fantasy VI, I'm pretty sure was like $79.99 American when it came out
Right.
back in the day. So like, I don't know what that cost went to, but that's expensive by today's like that's normal AAA price nowadays, and that's back in like what 1995 that game came out. No, four.
I guess what I'll conclude is like, at worst, flash carts have a 20-year lead. So then when the flash carts are dead, or when all the cartridges are dead, and then you offer a console that has a cartridge slot, and so the only solution is to put a flash card in there, what would be the point, right? So the logical conclusion would then be to make an FPGA console that has whatever it needs for like cartridge extensions on board, right? So things like the SuperFX chips, all that stuff on Super Nintendo, just to use that example, right? Any kind of mapper or a cartridge, like extended like processing that's on the cartridge, you have to have all that on board on the console now, and then all the user does is provide the ROM via SD card slot or something like that, right? So I think that based on that, what I'm saying is that analog consoles, and by that I mean produced by like the company Analog, their FPGA consoles are designed for use now. That is retro gaming in 2021's sort of like tip of the iceberg, or like peak or whatever. And then, but it's not like future aimed. And then so for future, we do have a sort of an example of the future being now, which is the Mister project. And Mister is based on like off the shelf parts, so it's not like a centralized like company saying like, here's the Mister, you can buy it. It's buy the DE10 Nano like FPGA board and like buy this fan and buy these IO, and it's actually not very difficult to assemble. Apparently, pretty average like.
So it's like building your own PC, but you're building a retro console.
Yeah, literally, pretty much. But it is an FPGA that is the centerpiece of this console, and you can load cores to it for consoles like SNES, Genesis, all the 8-bit consoles.
So you're making a digital-only build-it-yourself console.
Yeah, even arcade boards. Yeah, it's basically a DIY FPGA console.
That plays everything.
People develop cores for it, and you load cores for it, you load ROMs for it, and it is like when you
say cores, do you mean like, is it just running emulators? Like, what makes this different from a Raspberry Pi? Are you saying people are developing like actual physical, like pieces for it that you would load into this?
No, so it's a firmware that you flash. So remember that an FPGA is a chip that is reprogrammable, right?
Yeah.
So you run you develop code for it, which is like Verilog or whatever the other one is called. I can't remember at this very moment. VHDL, I think. You write code for it that is a hardware description language. It describes what like the, I guess, target hardware or like what the end result you want is.
Yeah.
And then you flash that to the FPGA, and the FPGA configures itself to match the destination hardware.
I guess what my concern is that so that's obviously very different than the actual consoles themselves. It just, in my mind, how is this different from a computer running an emulator? Because computers run into compatibility issues. Will these things actually have full compatibility with the things that are running on them?
So yeah.
Will it be one-to-one with the old consoles, or will it be like an imperfect preservation, I guess, is my thing?
It'll be as perfect as anything an FPGA has been so far. So like to describe that, like the analog Super NT that I have here in front of me has an FPGA in it. It does not have like what they call an ASIC or whatever. Like it doesn't have like a hard like circuited wired chip in it.
Yeah.
It has an FPGA. So an FPGA can always be rewritten. And so when they release a firmware update to fix an incompatibility, I flash that firmware on the Super NT, and what that's really doing is it's actually updating the code, the hardware description code that configures the FPGA. So an FPGA is not a processor, like it's not a CPU. It can be a CPU if you configure it a certain way, and it is configured to be like the SNES CPU and PPU and sound chip and all of the buses between them and et cetera. So essentially, when you, like, for example, what I know that Kevtris, the person who wrote the cores for all of the analog products, what he has done is he's taken like an oscilloscope and and like electrical, like metering tools, like a multimeter thing, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And like he's done it at like a voltage level, like voltage leaves this chip at this measurement and goes here and and then you describe it in the code. That's what like the type of code for an FPGA is. It's a description of literally of hardware.
So
and
this
then
is like
FPGA,
that breaking of the genome that I was talking about earlier. He's basically mapped out electrically what all the pieces, all the physical pieces of these pieces of these pieces of gear do.
FPGAs are like circuit boards without a permanent configuration. They can change themselves when you give it the code.
Okay, so here's my question: without getting into, I guess, it too deep, because I'm assuming that the answer to this is also insane. What's the life on that? Is it just going to be a situation where we perpetually have to just back up these things going forward with whatever new types of memory are available?
Oh, and like build more FPGA consoles because maybe there's a limit to how many times you can flash one, or is that what you mean?
Well, just anything, or just like
flash a FPGA board.
Just memory, not like what's the fail point of that form of storage? Because evidently we haven't come up with a truly infinite.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean,
solution.
we don't know how robust it is. Even like software emulation is not an infinite solution in the sense that like source code and binaries and all that stuff that's like on GitHub, let's say for like so-and-so emulator, like that's susceptible to all of GitHub's like data storage and backup, plus like where the author is backing up their code other than that as well, right? And so if like all of those hard drives die on the same day, that emulator's lost. But like so there's a certain amount of hardware in the background that needs to be like maintained and replaced for even a software emulator if you want to think of like literally the data storage involved, and also for all kinds of backups like ROMs and disk images.
So here's a question. Here's a question then.
Yeah.
This is like a philosophical question. Is it up to the game preservation community? I say community because I would like to imagine that there's more than just a few people into this, but like collectors.
There's a lot of people.
Yeah, collectors and people who want to preserve things, and just even enthusiasts or people who just want to play these old games.
It kind of is up to them.
It's like a collective burden of everybody to just kind of like keep this stuff around, because if you let up for even kind of, I don't want to say if you let up for even a second, but do you know what I mean? It's like a community.
No, you're right. No,
it's a community thing, because everybody has their part to play.
Individual and collective action together, but it's from the consumer side.
Yeah,
absolutely. Because largely the developers haven't participated very much in it. There are some cases, developers like M2 and Digital Eclipse, who have been hired by like Sega and SNK respectively to do re-releases of older games, and they're emulation-based products for new consoles. And
it's always because of the money in my mind. That's the reason why these companies are not always super into these kinds of preservation things, is because you get down this point and like it's people who are into them treating them like cultural artifacts, right? Which I think is fair. But to the company's point, it's like, well, but it's digital and like we still have access to that, and like we're not making money off of you guys all just trading around your copies of like Seiken Densetsu 3 or whatever. You know what I mean? It's just like that's not. So
there's a certain amount of
fair.
Convincing and like establishing that has to be done. Now there's a considerable amount of law on the side of the preservationists, not as much as we need or they need or however. Right. But there is some amount. For example, like it is legal to make your own backups. You just don't have the right to distribute somebody else's copyright.
Of course.
So then, for example, some of the organizations involved, like the Internet Archive, where you can't access any of it. ROMs and stuff. You can't access.
You were talking about this the other day. Yeah. Okay.
But it is there, and somebody has it, and maybe when it becomes, or if it becomes public domain, or the rights holders are, whichever way it could go, maybe at those times those things could become available from the Internet Archive, but it is still at least somewhat assuring that it is there, even if it isn't necessarily accessible from there. But then there's also other organizations like Gaming Alexandria, the Hidden Palace, who actually I really like those ones because those people are really about prototypes and like early beta versions, things like that.
Stuff that the companies really wouldn't want you finding.
Oh yeah, and the Hidden Palace, they're bold. They release that stuff too. And then people who document that stuff, like the Cutting Room Floor, which is a wiki. I'm sure you've probably seen it before. I even want to say, in a sense, that like romhacking.net has some aspect in preservation, because things like translation and stuff like that, maybe it's not strictly preservation, but it fits in sort of with the retro gaming aspect of like a lot of the only ways people experience these things. Like if you want to point at Earthbound, well, Mother 3 still hasn't been translated.
Yeah.
And like arguably the big thing with preservation is the companies don't give it to us, right? And you can sit there and like there's a talk by Frank Cifaldi, who is like the Video Game History Foundation guy, and also
Lost Levels guy.
Also works at Digital Eclipse, and he says
he's also on the
GDC
Insert
talk,
Credit podcast, which I've been listening
really?
to a lot
Okay.
of lately. Yeah.
Great, yeah, okay. So he said in a GDC talk recently that like that everything that you like want these companies to like do, there's like a part of this like more hardcore retro gaming community that like they don't need the companies to do it because they're already just doing it themselves.
Totally.
Like they've already translated.
Well, I think that's
so
I think
why
that's
are you
the thing.
begging Reggie? You know what I mean?
There's no room for them to go in and do it now because I think the community has really taken up the cause.
They don't know how to reach those people as customers, right? And so he does also make the argument that when you want to do some kind of compilation release, something like that you have to offer like some kind of value that they won't otherwise be able to find or get on their own. Like if you have more behind the scenes information, or if you can provide like like developer commentary, if you can provide scans of like old advertisements, material, books, like manuals, etc. Like
my God, yeah, manuals.
That kind of stuff. If you can add like quality of life features, but also serve them the original at the same time.
Yeah.
If it's going to Switch, portability.
it has to be a value added product. Otherwise, these people are just going to go to the numerous ways they can get it elsewhere.
And he made the case for how actually kind of simple it can be to do that. And so hopefully we see more developers stand up and do it. And like we've seen a really great example, and he also pointed out in that list, and I first saw it on My Life in Gaming and bought it, is the Phantasy Star 1 port that came to Switch, which is by M2, where that game had first person. Yeah, that game had first person dungeons, and they put in an auto mapper in like the UI that sits beside the game.
Yeah,
and it just maps the dungeon for you. Like that is a value added component to that game, and
exactly.
I have to say it probably wasn't that difficult to implement. It probably just reads the emulator's memory.
Yeah.
It's fantastic, right? And so I think that's what they really need to participate, to be able to rejoin and participate in the conversation about preservation, is they need to give us what we can't even find or make on our own in preservation.
I think this is going to sound silly, but I think also philosophically they need to realize that although they are putting out in some companies' minds maybe like a toy or whatever, they're also contributing to like a cultural fabric that people hold very personal to their hearts, and it's more than just a game at this point to some people, which sounds silly to say. Like I'm not trying to get crazy about it. I'm just saying that like it's
crazy because I agree with that.
It's
part of our arts and culture. And
exactly. That's what I'm saying.
I think that is more important than shareholders. And to be honest, in general, just with my political beliefs, I've become kind of just like anti the existence of shareholders altogether. But sorry if there's any shareholders listening. In my opinion, art and culture is more important to preserve than let it sit there unsold so that you can maybe someday make money.
I think these are absolutely arts and culture products, and I think that to let them wallow and rot because somebody hasn't found out a way to get money out of them again, that's to me the saddest thing possible. And I'm going to even defend libraries from consoles that are like kind of, historically useless, because I think that there's merit in all of it. Real people made these things, real people made that music, real people made those graphics. Exactly, man.
Even a literally bad game is worth preserving.
Imagine if we lost Deadly Premonition.
Oh no. Oh God. You shouldn't say things like that. It terrifies me.
But you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, because sometimes it's fun to go back and like visit these things.
So then,
and just go like, wow, I will never own a copy of this. I will never but it's interesting that I can go experience it because it's such a trip,
Yeah. So then in a sense, I want to kind of make a bit of a call to action. In a way, I want to say that people should take it upon themselves to like get into some form of archival practice.
Would you call collecting an archival practice?
I might. I certainly would say that collectors should participate. For example, if you have something. So there's parts of the community that are trying to make like a collection of like ROMs or rips in the case of disc media that are like known good, because not every ROM dumper has done a perfect job of actually dumping the ROM of a cart correctly. And
Right.
so there's been a lot of work going into like the ROMs that are you can find on the internet. Are they accurate dumps or do they need to be replaced? And so I don't have it off the top of my head, but I believe like I think some of those groups like Video Game Preservation Collective, I think maybe those ones who are a little more official, you might struggle to find a way you can just jump in and participate with. Although I think Video Game Preservation Collective works. Certainly places like the Hidden Palace, if you have a prototype cartridge at all, that is the place to reach out, and they'll find a way to connect you with somebody who can dump the ROM on that cartridge to preserve it. So yeah, if anybody listening, you have any kind of prototype stuff, anything rare. I mean, when I say rare, like just throw an example out there, like Skies of Arcadia Legends is like rare and
I was going to say you're not talking about my
dumb.
copy of Skies of Arcadia Legends, are you?
You're not. This sounds almost rude, but that's not something that isn't ripped. You know what I mean?
How dare you?
For the most part, like most commercial games are like ripped.
That game is a treasure, sir.
Yeah, and so like it does apply to collectors, but I also want to say like, and here's where I have to be extremely clear to not get myself into trouble. Do not break your country's laws.
Sure.
Unless you're willing to take on the risks, but not because I told you to. But it isn't a bad idea to have like a full set of ROMs, because the more people that hold a full set of ROMs for a given console, then the more copies of that there are out there in the world, so that one computer doesn't go down and all of those ROMs are lost, right?
So here's... Wait, I wanted you to finish your point, but I do have something to say about this because it leads into something that I did want to talk about as well, related to this topic, to tack on to the end of it.
Okay. Sorry,
I didn't want to interrupt your sentence, that's all.
Sure. And then I also want to say, like, in an even greater gray area, I think in some sense, we have, like, the people that make cracks for, like, PC DRM to thank for the potential future of a lot of games if services like Steam or other like digital distribution were to go down.
Sure.
Then like what other option do you even have to access your games anymore than to find the cracks, right? And I'm not necessarily saying that, you should all suddenly just start like pirating all your games or anything like that, but just I guess in a more simple term, I am thankful that there are people out there that are making an effort to crack DRM, because it almost goes back to our Stadia. Yeah, it almost goes back to our Stadia discussion the other day, because if that's the future, at least like we should have some sort of like future-proofed access to what we can download now while we still can. And then lastly, even like obscure things like RPG Maker games. Right. Even. So I kind of want to say the better ones, but maybe even all of them.
We all know what you mean.
Deserve to be backed up. And also shout outs to like communities like retro computing. There are like communities out there even for that, where like people use those older sort of like pre-Windows like machines, pre like graphic operating system machines, like as enthusiasts. But I also think that they are participating in some form of preservation, and a certain amount of what they do with those computers is games, and so they are a part of this as well, even if the scope of what they do is a little wider than just games. And so like in a way, if like all that kind of collective action by individuals, by the consumers is like being done, then I think there's still a lot of hope, even though there are games already that are lost. Again, back to that that GDC talk I mentioned by Frank Cifaldi, like he mentions that they couldn't find SNK's first ever game. Like it like they eventually did find it, like one, like it's like a table cabinet, like one copy of it in Japan that like worked.
Wow.
And that's like literally all they could find. Just like one guy has it, like in the entire world.
It's funny because people don't think about this kind of loss of, if you want to call it like cultural capital, but it's a big deal. Like movies used to do it. There's that story about how the BBC just used to get rid of their old reels after they were like done with them, and like a whole bunch of
sell off. Yeah,
it's just gone.
Early Castlevania art was destroyed in an earthquake in Kobe, Japan, in the late 90s, like for Castlevania 3.
Yeah, and
so like that. StarCraft source code was thought lost. Until like a gold master with the source code turned up on an eBay auction, like in 2017.
The PS1 Final Fantasies.
StarCraft. Yeah, PS1 Final Fantasy backgrounds.
Yeah. Kingdom Hearts 1. Like it's it's wild because I think people
the companies are not doing their part, in my opinion, on preservation.
Well, because I don't think
I
it's
highly encourage people to.
I think it's because they don't see it the same way as the people who consume the media do. Do you know what I mean? It's the same way film lovers
Absolutely.
probably feel a different way about film than a lot of people who run film companies do.
That is
Music,
primarily why I kind of threw in a little bit of a snarky attack on the concept of shareholders
Yeah.
earlier in the conversation. But yeah. It's all business to them, and if it's not saleable, or if the product is just like the deliverable, the executable, whatever is like what they sell, and everything else costs them in terms of upkeeping storage, then they're going to cut costs. It's just what they do.
Okay, so I got a really quick.
Some companies have gotten in and participated. Like I said, I think that the companies that have hired companies like M2 and Digital Eclipse
Yeah.
and others to, I also want to shout out Sega for like hiring Christian Whitehead, who was doing like the Android ports. What they essentially did was like reverse engineered the Sonic engine for like those old Sonic games.
Well, he did Mania, did he not?
Yeah, exactly. So, but what he really did was reverse engineered, not just like reverse engineer a console so it can run a ROM, but like they actually reverse engineered like the engine of the game from the ROM data to like port it to Android and to like make weird mods and ports and crazy things for Sonic, and then just got hired and made Mania. And that's awesome. So like good on Sega for like not instead just being like litigating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I think that's about all I have to say on it. What were you going to say?
No worries, man. No, I was going to say, you know what? I was wondering, why don't we continue this, I think, into what my next topic is, because I want to focus on the retro gaming part of it. I did have another topic.
Yeah.
I think we can bank it because I think we're on a good roll here, and everything you just said was really fascinating. I feel like I should have had more to add in the last like 25 minutes, but
it's okay.
No. Because you know a lot about that hardware side of things. You know that I'm a collector. I try to look for the carts. I've replaced my batteries in a lot of my games. I'm gonna have to replace the batteries in a bunch of my Super Famicom games probably. But I got a question, and this is, I think everything we just talked about was a perfect lead into it. Has there ever been a more accessible time for people to get into old games and retro gaming?
I mean, of course it gets better.
Well, that's what I said. I said, of course, it gets better every year. Like, it gets better every year, every day, every month. New developments all of the time. I think people like to lament the fact that buying retro games used to be cheap because there was a period of time when nobody wanted them anymore. And now it's kind of having like a vinyl record resurgence. So I think there's like an argument to be made that maybe it's kind of like in vogue right now. It's like popular. But do you like,
so then, okay,
I feel like I don't even have to ask you this. Like, obviously you think that now is probably the most accessible time because whether it's emulators, whether it's, analogs offerings, whether it's buying used consoles.
I mentioned earlier too. So, okay. So, if you are very focused on having the original product, maybe there has been a better time previously due to the rise and in popularity that has happened.
Sure.
Because that's a fair point. All right. So yeah,
especially with Nintendo stuff. Nintendo stuff is Nintendo and Dreamcast are almost like out to lunch. Like if you want to collect PS2, go to town. It's easy. Xbox is easy. Even Genesis for the most part is pretty doable. NES is pretty all right. But like Super Nintendo and Dreamcast are like right out. And then like, and then occasionally certain GameCube games and certain PS1 games are really hard to find.
Yeah. And then, so like, it's kind of a mixed bag. And I guess I would say if you're really a kind of a collector angled, like minded type of person, you're going to have maybe a harder time now than you would have in the past. But I also think it could be a little cyclical too. Because definitely. Some of those games that people are picking up, at least while they're in an operable condition, like also can re-enter the market too, right? So, and then it seems some people now I don't tend to do a whole lot of buying older games. I do buy some, but I also, I don't do it like in sort of like massive and frequent enough quantities to have noticed this by myself. So this is sort of a third party observation, like from what I've observed in certain like retro gaming circles online. Okay. But a lot of people discuss sort of like a cyclical flow to which particular consoles are seeing like high popularity and low popularity. And then so, for example, right now, apparently Nintendo 64, or at least in the past
Really?
like year before the pandemic, Nintendo 64 was like on a big rise, right?
That's
And then
so
Nintendo
strange to
64
me.
kind of took a and then it kind of took a dive, and then the pandemic started, and then suddenly the Wii went on the rise. And I think that
Whoa.
reason for that one is because there's a massive like
Bunch of families
quote
stuck inside
unquote
together.
install base of Wii's. Yeah, there's so many households that are pulling out a Wii from the closet because they're stuck at home, and it's like, oh yeah, I got that old thing.
My
And
buddy
they
got
just-
real into Wii Sports with his girlfriend over the pandemic. He kept on like Instagram storying it, being like playing bowling, and I was like, really? Okay,
Cool. I mean, yeah,
it's fun. Wii Sports is like probably the best value added buy-in pack like game ever.
it may be the most successful one.
Because what are the other options? It's like Super Mario World, and the other one's Sonic the Hedgehog. Both two fantastic games, but like, come on, let's get real. Like Wii Sports
It was
sold
an
like
accessibility
millions.
like dream for them. Yeah, absolutely. And then so yeah, but if you're willing to like play through these alternatives like emulation, flashcards, FPGA systems, whatever, then I would say there's no better time than now. Yeah.
Well, just because your options are so varied, right? And
Absolutely.
it's accessible, but here's the thing. I don't know that it's cheap no matter what route you take, unless you go full emulation on your computer, which is why I say that it's probably de facto the most accessible time, because you can get pretty much everything retro on a computer now if it's
Okay.
just even like okay for the most part. You know what I mean? But I think
In the case of the FPGA though, it is cheaper to build a Mister than it is to buy like 10 of Analog's products.
totally. But I
there
think what I'm
is-
saying is that there's still like a buy-in for all of that retro stuff. For
Yeah.
example, like I just bought my upscaler, right? And I bought the retro mini from
RetroTink.
RetroTink.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
think it's called the RetroTink Mini. I should know. I bought it. It's
I
sitting
think
right
it's
over
the
there.
RetroTink 2X Mini.
That's it. That's the name. And it was like not. It was not like crazy expensive. It wasn't like as expensive as buying like a pretty solid capture card or anything like that. And it does a fantastic job. My Super Nintendo looks great on my big TV, but it
But
was still
even
like
it is not the top of the line in its own class.
it's not the top of its own class, and it was still like over $100, right? And like for somebody
Yeah.
who's in school or they're younger and they're just getting a taste for it, or they've played, like maybe they've gotten their hands on some old Game Boy games and they want to try the Super Nintendo. It's like there's Virtual Console, they could do that. I mean, the Switch has the Nintendo Online thing, which is
Or
okay.
think, you know what?
But
Think somebody our age, like our friend, we'll go first names only, but like our friend Josh, who wanted to play some Super Nintendo games. I don't imagine a world where he would buy that product, and that's the cheap option.
and that's
really.
and this is just to
Other
make it
than
look
just
good,
plugging directly into the TV, yeah,
and that's just to make it look
to
good.
make it
'Cause-
look good and to have low latency.
Well, the other thing though is like, so my TV, I lucked out. It actually has component on the back anyway, so I could plug it in if I wanted to. I prefer to use the upscaler. That's why I bought it. It's unnecessary, but I wanted the zero
I
latency,
wouldn't say so. Yeah, okay,
and I wanted
yeah, yeah.
and I wanted the look, right? But I could.
bet you if you lag tested it, you'd find it performs slower than your scaler.
It actually, you know what? In the back of it, I don't know. You can tell me this. It actually has like a cable slot. I could plug in using the RF adapter. Would that do anything, or would that still be bad?
I think the issue is that it's a digital TV that has to do processing to an
Right,
analog
okay.
signal in order to
That's what I figured. I figured it'd be the
display
same.
it.
But anyways, my point being that like I could do that, but I know that would be a suboptimal experience for what I want to experience from that. So I went this route, right? But you're right. Our friend would not go that route, and nobody should. If he just wants to play Super Mario World on a secondhand SNES he happens to have, no one should be like, oh, well, to actually like have that not have crazy lag and play properly like it's intended to, you have to spend an extra $150 on this thing.
yeah.
Like that's not accessible. So if he wants
think
to go
there's
the
a
route
lot
of
of
playing it
people-
on his computer, I don't blame him at all. But then the interfacing
Yeah.
with that is also not one-to-one with, unless you have an adapter for a Super Nintendo controller. So even though it's accessible, even though it's more accessible because there's never been more options,
it's
wonder.
not the same experience.
Well, yeah, but I
And
wonder.
even-
I wonder if accessibility, like, so you can have all the options in the world, and it can be very accessible in theory. But is the intended experience accessible?
Right.
That's a question that I.
It's not, and it won't be after a point, and that's kind of that. But there is something that you can do to help somewhat, and I think that's things like box and manual scans and things like that. They don't necessarily have to do with literally the experience of like using the right controller and plugging in the right cartridge and so forth. But I mean, I think that whatever you can do to give context to the era the game was released in and what kind of materials came with it, and even just documentation on like the consoles themselves is like from the more historian type of perspective what should be done about that. And then in the modern day, as far as emulation goes, yeah, that's the hardware buy-in to get a truer experience. Every little step of it, whether it be buying an appropriate controller adapter and a controller, even if you don't have one, to like play an emulator in a intended like just format for control, is like just one step. And then after that, it's like, do we use a real console? Do we use
I got
a
two
scaler?
things. I got two things for this then. Okay, first thing. Regarding the manuals and boxes, my parents have been like just going through all the stuff and just trying to downsize, right? And when I was home last, way before COVID, it was last like over a year ago now. Like I'm gonna, wait. Yeah, it was like last Christmas. I'm trying to remember exactly when I saw this thing. They showed me. My mom had kept in a box. Basically, I never threw any of that stuff out. She has like a box full of flattened, not like flattened along the appropriate creases, like
in a nice way, yeah. Okay.
Like Game Boy Advance boxes and I don't have every single thing, but man, the manuals. She showed me a box that she had, like a little tiny box that must have had jewelry in it. It's maybe like 4 or 5 inches high, with like a lid. Open it up. There's like 80 to 100 Game Boy manuals in there, just like Game Boy Advance games, Game Boy games, Game Boy Color games, and they're all like some of them like I had obviously looked through more than others, but like they're all in like amazing condition. And I was like, Mom, don't throw this out. She's like, do you want to take it back with you? And I'm like, I don't want to take it back with me right now because I don't have a place for it. But I'm like, people pay money for that online. That's don't get rid of that. I was basically just like, do not get rid of that. Like that's actually super awesome that you kept that. And she's like, well, it was yours, but like it's nuts. I got to go through their house basically at some point when the pandemic has gone away. And go through that because there's a lot. Like I was just leafing through it quickly, right? And I'm looking at like the instruction manual for, like Zelda and Mega Man Battle Network and like Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, and I was just like, oh my god, just like the memories, it was insane. That was really, really fantastic. Nice little surprise. I just like looked at them for an hour or so. It was just very, very cool.
Right on. I think that's great.
You just spurred my memory when you were talking about manuals. I was just like, oh my god, yeah, the manual thing. The other thing I wanted to say was regarding. So we were talking earlier about how companies haven't really done their part in the preservation side of things because they're trying to figure out how to make money on them, right? What if? And I'm just throwing this out there. What if they facilitated the one-to-one experience? So here's the thing: like, say Nintendo knows people are out there emulating their games or using like analogs consoles to play their games. What if because I got it right here on my desk. I got the wireless Super Nintendo controller Bluetooth for the Switch, which feels just so good. I actually have an actual Super Nintendo controller next to it that I've plugged in with a USB emulator into my computer. Sorry, not emulator. USB adapter into my computer for recording footage, and it's just like, man, this wireless one feels great. What if they, instead of releasing this as like a limited edition collector's item, because I know they love doing that, and that's why I bought it because it's just so damn cool. What if they got in on the scene and had like reproductions of their classic controllers, so people who wanted to enjoy these games, because that's where they could get
how they issue GameCube controllers every time they release a Smash game.
Because man, that's where they could find their way in, right? Like
controllers are important too. In fact, we kind of didn't cover that, but it's the same thing. Eventually, there may no longer be any official controllers for
third-party efforts usually suck or they don't feel right. Yeah. For example, like how many times. Like pretty much every time I've played a retro game, either through an emulator or a retro console or something that's not original, I've gone out of my way to dig out my original controller for it if I have it, because it's
I just recently bought an N64 controller and an adapter.
Yeah, and you bought a Nintendo one because all the other ones are bad.
Yeah.
So, like, this is what I mean. It's like, Nintendo, you could print money if you just made N64 controllers again.
There's actually some good options out there for N64 controllers.
Sure.
Some of which were so long ago that they themselves are also already now rare. Things like the Hori pads and stuff like that. But then there's also like even further, like kind of newly made controllers and stuff that are very good for N64 that are like replications of even that controller.
But my point is like,
but
maybe they don't have the
original controller.
Maybe they don't have the manufacturing wherewithal to start these things up again. But like, if Nintendo released classic controllers for all of their classic systems, like, because they know secondhand NESs are out there, they know secondhand Super Nintendos are out there, right? And the controllers are wearing out faster than the carts and the consoles. If they released just versions of those that worked, man, like, I think people would buy them up. I think they would. I think the retro market would go crazy for them, especially if they made them like affordable. If they were like $39.99.
We've already seen it happen in a way. If I'm not mistaken, now it's not literally made by Sega. Sega is pretty out of hardware, but if I'm not mistaken, I think Retrobit has claimed that their Genesis controllers are made with the original molds.
I just do not like the Genesis controller in general.
Sure, but I'm just like.
But no, exactly. But that's exactly.
It's on the topic, right?
No, I know.
Yeah.
I was just being cheeky. But
and it is an official Sega licensed controller, so it is not like Retrobit, like, I don't know, found a mold for a controller that like some employee took home or something. It's like Sega was like, here you go, and they were like, let's do it. And from what I've heard from the reviews, other than just a very slight difference in the D-pad that could even just come down to preference, but it is a difference. Other than that, it's like the same and like an extremely good controller.
Yeah. I think that this would be, if they want to get in on people playing their games, quote unquote, without their permission or whatever, I think the easiest way is to get literally physically in between them and their game. Give them a real controller. Be like, hey, we understand that you don't have $300 to buy a real copy of Earthbound, and we're never going to release it in a format where you want to play it or can play it. So if you're going to play it on your laptop, here's an official Super Nintendo controller minted in 2021. You know, just plug this sucker straight into your MacBook Air or whatever. It's just, that would be rad. That would be so cool.
Go to Retrobit for an adapter. I mean, not Retrobit. Go to RAFnet for an adapter,
or sell them an adapter. Be
transparent.
Just be totally Apple about it and be like, you know what? Actually, if they want to make more money, sell the adapter separately. Obviously, that's total nonsense move. Put the adapter in the case. If you're going to sell Super Nintendo controller to kids who want to play emulators or whatever, put it in the case. But what that move would say to me is they're owning the fact that their products are beloved, but slightly inaccessible in their original form. And it's like an olive branch to the community, being like, we know you love this stuff. We're going to make it easier for you while still getting our part. You know what I mean? Like, we're still getting a little bit of kickback from it, obviously. But it's like an olive branch to the community. Well, that sounds weird because it sounds like they're at war. I mean, sometimes it feels like maybe they are.
They let's just be honest. They are straight up at war with that community. It's not that long ago that they took down like Love ROMs and then caused a bunch of other ROM sites to take down everything they had, even though they weren't even targeted in the lawsuit.
Right.
There's no doubt about it. They are still like pretty much at war against at least the emulation aspect of the community.
See, to me, it's just, and the reason why I'm focusing on controllers so much right now, the reason why I had this like brainwave is because like they're never going to outrun the ROM community, the preservation community, and the indie emulator devs. They're never going to do it. Even if they've launched their own, it doesn't matter. There's better community-sourced options available right now, right? So the one thing that the community seems to be really bad at is manufacturing one-to-one exact Super Nintendo N64 controllers, all those other things, right? Just do that. I mean, you think Sony doesn't know that anybody with a Bluetooth connection or a USB isn't plugging their PS3 controller in to get like a realistic PS2 experience? Like of course
Yeah.
they know that. Of course they know that.
Yeah.
It's so obvious. It's a wireless PS2 controller. What? Like they're not, you know,
Yeah.
they're not blind. It's obvious that's what's happening. And like the Bluetooth functionality is there because they wanted wireless controllers for the PS3, all that stuff. Like, and that's all great. But like
It could all be proprietary.
they also knew right
It
away,
doesn't
man.
have to be like a direct input device in Windows. I
Yeah.
mean, it could be better. It could be an X input device. I don't really know if Microsoft would let them make it an X input device because but it doesn't even have to be direct. It could be something completely alien to a computer.
But just
Could be,
just
but it
own
isn't.
it. Yeah, exactly. So I'm saying like just own it. Like just people are doing that. If the concern is really that you're not making any money off that community and that's why you have such like a vendetta against them, then get in there, man, because there are people making money off the fact that you are not making N64 controllers anymore. You know what I
I would
mean?
love to see them. I would love to see it happen. I
don't think it will.
don't think it will in Nintendo's case.
It's just that's why it bugs me though when I have this like high quality, like beautiful Super Nintendo wireless controller in my hands right now, and I'm looking at it and I'm going like, you could just make these. But you don't.
At least not in mass.
Exactly.
You have to be a Nintendo Online subscriber to get it. Like, come on.
And
Why are we
that's
doing
that's
that?
part of what Nintendo that gets me. It's because the one thing I like about Nintendo is it always feels like a premium product, but then sometimes it feels like they don't always like trust me as somebody who's like a huge Nintendo fan. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, I mean I mean, if you want to get into trust, like look at how Nintendo has treated the Melee community.
Yeah, I
You know
don't.
what I mean?
I don't want to just bash on Nintendo
Yeah.
as
No, I know. I
the
just-
demons of game preservation efforts. But whenever you get into this conversation, like let's be honest, they're the company that comes up the most. I think they are.
They're like the Disney of that industry
Yeah, because I think that
in so many ways, but in particular in the ways that they feel about things like copyright law and what happens with their intellectual property in general. So
yeah, I just don't see the other communities. The other companies treating this scene or the participants in this scene or the big players the same way. Like you said, Sega goes and hires ROM hackers to make the next Sonic game because evidently they're doing a better job. You know,
Or that
like
you can literally just grab the ROM from the Steam folder when you buy any of their like Genesis classics on Steam.
yeah. And to me, that
The ROM is just there in a folder, uncompressed.
that's the
Companies-
trust that I was talking about. That's kind of like that thing where it's just like, we love that you love us. Do with this what you will. We're so happy you paid for it. I'm not saying that companies need to just give the consumer things because I have a big problem with entitled consumers as well. But I do think there's opportunities for communities and consumers to build like a symbiotic relationship, especially around a shared cultural history.
Companies have also even slighted the emulation community in the same move that they are like using something from them. So, for example, I just sent you. So this developer
Still have not turned off my Discords.
So this developer develops a couple of emulators. Probably the most popular, well-known one is MGBA, which is currently kind of like the gold standard on like a Game Boy Advance emulator. And they had noticed that the company Arcade 1-Up, who makes those like sort of modern like arcade style machines,
Yeah.
Arcade 1-Up is using emulators that are not under like a distribution license that allows them to be used to be distributed in like commercial product, right? And to make this even crazier, those Arcade 1-Up machines are licensed by like Capcom and like other partners to have the games that they have on them. And this emulator developer noticed that the firmware literally just contains the ROMs, and all you need to do is just extract a couple files in a row. It was a few nested extractions, but just a couple extractions with 7-zip, and you literally just have the ROMs, and the firmware update is just available on the website and doesn't need to be paid for. So they're essentially just distributing the ROMs to anyone who goes and downloads that firmware and unzips.
So are they just thinking that but they're just not going to get away with it? Like, what do they think the community is? Like, these communities are backwards developing in software form, like 30-year-old pieces of hardware. Do they think they're not going to find out?
It's
Like, that's crazy
it's
insulting
ridiculous.
to me.
And the worst part about it too is like emulation is still in just a gray enough area, and also something that doesn't generally make any emulation developers very much money.
Yeah.
So none of them are going to go there and defend their work in developing an emulator. It's, that largely isn't going to be happening. Like, so the developer, just to give the shout out, is Ndrift, who develops MGBA. And like, I don't think that they're going to be, actually, I doubt they would be able to. Well, I shouldn't say what I think somebody else maybe can or can't do, but I doubt they would be able to like. I just said able and then said I wouldn't say able and then said able, but I doubt they would pursue Arcade 1-Up in a legal manner. But calling them out in a public way and letting as many people as their reach includes letting those people all know.
It hurts their reputation and possibly their bottom line.
Yeah, like this product is using like 7 emulators that are not under commercial licenses. So like, because you know what I mean? Because you can open source a product, or I mean, you can open source, you can open source like a piece of software, like an emulator or anything, and the license that you open source it under like is what determines what you can do with it, right? So, for example, one of the emulators that they mention actually is supposed to have you like take any like changes or any like source code that you use on that like that you make that uses that emulator, you're supposed to like contribute it back. So like that's why the whole thread that I sent you starts with like, can I get the source code for your box? Because that license like says that if this is open source, then derivatives have to be open source too. That's what the emulator essentially says.
Yeah.
So it's like, you know what I mean? And then this isn't the first time that commercial entities have taken open source things that have non-commercial licenses and done this. It's not the first time. I'm sure it won't be the last time. But to me, more than anything else, I almost want to say even more than just like trying to take an emulator developer to court, like in the case of like Sony versus Bleem or something like that. Like,
yeah.
I almost want to say this is like more offensive.
Oh, definitely.
To just take it and profit off it, regardless of the fact that the license says that you can't do that. Like, it's just not cool.
Okay.
It's not.
So, okay, yeah, no, like, man, I'm just reading this tweet. That's nuts. Would you say then, to close out this topic, would you say, I guess, close out this topic and then move on to the backlog conversation, just because we're running. I think we've talked about this for an hour.
Yeah.
But it's a good topic. It's fascinating.
It's cool that they aligned like that. I didn't know that your topic would be related.
Well, I wanted to
so closely.
I wanted to talk about something that I know you have a lot of opinions on, and then when you already had it prepared, I was just like, you know what, let's just go. Let's just go. I'm ready to learn. Would you say then, and like I said, let's sum this up. I'm asking you a question, almost a yes or no question. Do you think that the state of retro gaming 2021 then is maybe a little bit complicated? It's accessible, but it's also a little bit of a confused zone right now. There's never been a better time to experience such a wide array of old games, but at the same time, you have official responses between the developers and the community of the preservation side of things, and then you have the companies that maybe own the intellectual property rights to some of this stuff. We're also at a time when they're still kind of figuring out the relationship. I think we're at like a weird moment where going forward, I think companies responding the way Nintendo did are going to be in the minority. I think the majority
that's true.
I think the majority of companies are going to move forward with a more collaborative effort. I don't think Nintendo will. Maybe not collaborative. That's not the right word. But like,
but I think they're learning to serve the market something that they'll actually buy, that they otherwise, won't say, I can just go find the ROM online.
Right.
It's like a whole extra thing. When
It's a demographic they've been ignoring because they were always operating under the assumption that nobody wanted to play old stuff anymore.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's a tricky market to reach. I absolutely don't deny that. It's a tricky market to reach, but I think that they're discovering how. And so
The future is
that's
bright.
a start. I think that part of the future is bright, but I think that it's still actually pretty precarious. But I think that the community is not going to shrink.
No.
And I also kind of think the community isn't going to get into a worse, hopefully, position legally than where all of the efforts stand. Because, again, some of these things require sort of working around some laws. And for the most part, you can do a lot of things above board in retro gaming. Like you can dump your own carts, rip your own ROMs, and then run them in an emulator. And that's
For sure.
all fine, right? So there's gray areas, but there's a lot you can do above board. And also in preservation and stuff like that in retro gaming. But I do think it's still just a little precarious, but I don't think it's going to shrink or go away. So, I think it's always a good time for retro gaming. I think it's still a good time for retro gaming. I think it's the best time it's ever been for retro gaming. And
there it is.
The future is...
You're optimistic for the future, but cautious.
I'm optimistic for the future.
Cautiously optimistic.
But yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
It's really hard to explain exactly how I feel about it, but it's hard to put into words.
I feel like I understand it better after this.
Hopefully, you, the listener, understand.
Speaking of this, gonna premiere the new sting for the backlog segment. After 2 episodes of just saying we're going into the backlog, we've made up a little musical number. It's super dumb.
That's fun. Whatever. It makes our podcast a little more Broadway. A little more Broadway. By the way.
A little more theatrical, if you will.
A little more yeah.
And with that, here it is.
You know what it is, it's the backlog.
All right. And with that, now we're into the backlog. I think did I go first last time? No, you talked about Short Hike. And then I talked about Resident Evil.
Okay. So go ahead. What do you have on your backlog? What do you want to talk about from the backlog?
I already mentioned it. Earthbound.
Today? Oh, Earthbound. Okay.
Earthbound. Okay, so I will admit I have played this game. Not all the way through, though. And I'll tell you why. I got a good reason for this one. I got to a point where I was really enjoying what I was playing, like a lot. I had never been as far as I was. I didn't have the full party yet. I think I just had just gotten Jeff. I don't even, that's not that far. I know it's not. So I hadn't gotten to really deep into it, but I was starting to really have fun with its weirdness, have fun with the world.
Getting some momentum.
And I stopped. And I stopped because I hit a point where I got... Who's the character after Jeff? The martial arts guy.
Pooh,
yeah. So I got him, and I looked up online, and I shouldn't have done it, Ben. I ruined it. I looked up online that you can get really rare drops for weapons that he can equip. It's like the King's Sword or something from Starman battles. And people were saying oh, it's not that hard to get. I got it on my first playthrough.
Did you burn yourself out trying to get it?
No, I didn't even start because I saw the spiral of obsession in it down the road. And I was just
held it at arm's length.
And I just went, I don't even want to tempt myself. But here's the thing. So I've been going back and playing Final Fantasy II on the SNES, thanks to the upscaler. As you know, I've also been doing a run through of Chrono Trigger that I've been recording, and I'm approaching these games with sort of a childlike mindset where I go into them and I just go I know that there's things I'm going to miss, and that's okay because I'm here for the game. I'm not here to brag about playing this game. I'm here to experience it, right? Or that's what I'm trying to keep in mind. So I think after Final Fantasy II, after Chrono Trigger, I think I want to start an Earthbound, and I want to finally finish it because it's a game that just it's so me. Just in what I've played, I'm just of course, I would love the rest of this. I know I will. Like deep down inside, like it's kind of like equal parts Dragon Quest and like strange Cartoon Network Adult Swim 90s show. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know what it is about it, but it's got this weird Americana through a Japanese developer lens. I dig it. It's right up my alley. The music is surreal and off-putting at times. The story as well. I'm so into its strange Kafka-esque slice of life. It's weird. I love it. I need to finish it because I feel like I can't own up to that. I feel like I can't own up to my feelings that I know I want to have towards it unless I actually experience it in full. And I've just been putting it off for like literally years. I think I first heard about this game / played it on a emulator in high school. I've been sitting on this game for like 16 years, man. And I really just want to experience it. And I think I found a way, finally now, as an adult, a way to like mentally prep myself to enjoy it just for it instead of something that needs to be like conquered and devoured. It can be something that's like enjoyed, which sounds stupid because I know we're talking about games, but that's somewhere along the line. My relationship with these giant RPGs, with these things, became a loop of paranoia about missing out on missable items. You know, progressing to a part in the story and then getting locked out of someone's ultimate weapon because you forgot to do that one side quest on disc 3. That did happen to me on Final Fantasy 9. I finished the game anyways, but you know what I mean? That kind of stuff used to stress me out and I didn't want to miss that stuff. But at the end of the day, I would never go for 100% completion anyways. So like, why did I care? Basically was the point. And I don't have an answer for you. And it's taken me until now to kind of like taken me until now to learn how to enjoy these games on face value the way the developer, I think, intended for like a first-time player. You know what I mean? So I want to have that experience with Earthbound. I want to give it another shot. That's my backlog game. It's high on my list too. It's coming.
Yeah, I have it underway as well. I actually, it sounds like I'm right about where you dropped off your first time through it because I'm in like Saturn Valley.
Yeah, that's it. I think that's
not
where
long
I was.
after having gotten Jeff, and I was playing it pretty regularly, playing a little bit every couple days or something like that, and I haven't touched it in several months. But the one thing that's kind of strongly going for it is it's in that phase where it still hasn't fallen sort of out of my memory yet, and I would feel pretty comfortable picking up and continuing that save. So maybe I should just kind of, give my head a shake and just hit the power button and go just to refresh it,
Yeah.
So that I don't let it go too long that I feel I need to start over. Yeah. Okay, cool. So I'm looking forward to finishing that one myself. Maybe if you get it underway, that'll inspire me to keep doing mine and we could kind of talk about the game by the time we're done it. That would be really nice.
I think it's one of those games that I really want to have like a strong opinion on outside of, oh yeah, that's a really important game. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So I want to finish it. I want it to be one of those ones I can put on the shelf.
And in a way, to me, like beating like a classic and important game and then doing the same thing, but it's a classic and important game that was on the SNES is just kind of like an extra little sprinkle of sugar on top.
Oh yeah. Oh, definitely.
It's my favorite console. And if I want to keep calling it my favorite console, I'd like to get to a point where I'm pretty familiar with like all of the like really great stuff that's on it at least. Right. So yeah.
100%. Agree 100%.
Okay. So there's actually, funny enough, a similarity between your backlog pick and mine. Do you have anything else to say about yours? I guess just
no. I figured that would be.
There was a sort of a feeling of finality there. Okay.
Yeah, I know. I figured it would be a really short thing because I figured that you would just be like, yeah, you should play that. I don't have a
lot to say about it specifically, but
I felt like I just had to get that confessional off my chest. I just had to like bare my soul about this game that seems like something that if you knew me, you would be like, oh, that guy loves Earthbound probably.
I guess another thing is like, it's no secret. It's an extremely well-known fact that Undertale is among several games that are like huge inspirations for Undertale, and that being one of my favorite games.
Undertale's an inspiration for Undertale?
Earthbound is an inspiration for Undertale.
I know. I think you said Undertale. If not, when I listen back to this later, I'll feel like an asshole for making a joke out of that.
Well, whatever. I make mistakes like that, so it's not outside the realm of possibility. But yeah, Earthbound is a huge inspiration for Undertale.
Totally.
as well as things like Yume Nikki and like indie strange games off like RPG Maker games, whatever.
If I can slide it in, this is cheating. But
Oh, it's fine.
no. The reason why it's not fine is because we're gonna have to have a conversation about this at another time. In maybe this section, but you just reminded me that related to Earthbound, I should probably also, like, in the same way I want to do like Chrono Trigger and then play Radical Dreamers and then play Chrono Cross.
Oh, Mother 3?
No.
And,
no, I was going to say
Mother 1?
No, I was going to say Undertale.
Oh, okay. Well, also
Just
Undertale.
seems like a natural progression. Anyways.
And if you're going to play Undertale, you might as well also just play Deltarune Chapter 1 after.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, actually a funny commonality between your choice and my choice is mine is also a game that I've played and haven't finished. But it's not that long ago. It's a game I've started. It's on the backlog, but like, it's a new game, right? So for me, that's Sekiro.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
and a big reason why I'm more likely to say it's on my backlog than to say it's in progress is I think I'm just not in like an emotional state to like truly dive in and take that game on right now.
Well, you got to refine that state you were in when you played Dark Souls 1, 2, 3, and then Bloodborne all in like the same 3 months.
Yeah. Yeah. So largely the experience I had with Dark Souls 1 when I first picked it up is I spent about a good 20 hours between Firelink Shrine and like the first bell at the end of Undeadburg in like the chapel there.
Yeah.
Literally that's a quarter of my playtime in my Dark Souls 1 completion. And I spent a long time just getting acclimated to the game. And I'm not kidding when I say I might have had sessions that were like 10 to 20 minutes long. I had sessions where I didn't reach another bonfire. I merely gathered some souls and got a level or two. I had sessions where I did literally just go to another bonfire and then save and turn it off. And actually, I did the same thing. They're sculptors' idols. I did the same thing in Sekiro. I reached another checkpoint essentially and just shut it off. And because it's so different in how it plays than a Souls game, it's fresh and new and freshly difficult for me. But it's weighing on me in the same way that those early Dark Souls 1 days did. And I'm not, like, prepared, I guess.
Like it hasn't clicked yet.
For that, yeah, absolutely. And the biggest part is, like, I always say, and it's kind of the ironic thing, because a lot of people say this is one of the most stressful areas of Dark Souls 1, but I always say that I wasn't even really having fun in Dark Souls 1 until I got to Blighttown. Not necessarily just because of how Blighttown is, but because it took me about that long into the game and knowing that I rang the Undeadburg bell first for it to click, right?
Man, just slightly after that, like, okay, I've gotten to Anor Londo so many times and just been like, I can't, like, I want to. This is also a topic that I actually want to spend like the topic part of the show on. I want you, actually, it's coming. Not today, but it's coming. I want you to convince me to give Dark Souls a try because I bought them all. They're all on my PS4. They're all in HD. They're all sitting there staring at me every time I load up Community on Netflix, and they're just saying, "Play me, you lazy loser," and it just makes me upset because they're like Earthbound, something that like I love the lore of, I love the design of, I even like playing them a little bit. They just have never clicked. They never got to a point where I felt like I knew what I was doing. And therefore, every time I load it up, I just get my ass handed to me. So I know what you mean when you're talking about Sekiro, because that's what I feel like all of the time with these games.
Yeah, and I think some of the things that are getting in the way of Sekiro, there was a certain amount of time where I was cooling down off Souls, but there's also things like where I've picked up Savage Rating in FF14, and that is largely actually kind of a similar process to prog a raid is kind of like to put in attempts in a Souls boss. In a way, it's not literally the same type of gameplay, but it's the same sort of thing. It's
a little more forgiving with the fail state.
Mistakes and and you go back to the beginning and start again, right? And and so to play to like that is currently taking up a large amount of like my capacity to struggle I guess, which is an interesting statement to make, maybe. But like at the end of the day, this hobby is something that I would say that I prefer for it to be fun. And there are times when things that are that difficult aren't always. It's fun, but it's not necessarily always moment to moment fun. It's fun when you win,
Right. Yeah.
and you're there for the payoff, but it's not fun in every single moment of the process. And
Right.
I don't think I can have two things like that on the go. So it's kind of interesting. I meant to give that a little context. A new set of raids came out in 14 in December in Final Fantasy 14, and I meant to skip that tier. I didn't mean to raid the Savage difficulty this tier, but I got pulled into it. Somebody asked me kind of last minute, like, join us for a fight. I did, and now I'm like progging the third fight. And I can't do that at the same time as working on Sekiro.
Your emotional bandwidth for this activity is limited.
Yeah. When I was playing the Souls game, like, there's kind of a reason why I played them all back to back and wasn't really playing anything else at the time. Or certainly nothing like, I wasn't playing like an esports type game. I had largely already quit Dota by then, but I was an FF14 player then too, but I was not raiding. For Souls games, like, it kind of needs to be the main thing I'm focusing on. And Sekiro, whether or not people want to talk about whether it's a Souls game or not, it's got the same kind of like dedication requirement, and I still don't think I'm on a clean slate since the Dark Souls trilogy and Bloodborne. So
You're allowed
kind
to
of
take...
in recovery mode for those games, and got another difficult thing on the go, but it's on
the
kind
list.
of a recent spot on my backlog, and I really do want to finish it sooner rather than later.
Because you have physical for that, don't you?
Yeah, I do. I had to look over to see if I do. I do. It has controller problems on the Steam version, which is kind of unusual because
weird.
For all the problems that other FromSoft games have had, controls hasn't really been one of them on PC. Like, okay, maybe the mouse and controller controls are not like great, but you plug in a controller, it works or whatever, right? But
yeah.
I think in particular the DualShock 4, like, it doesn't work nicely with that game on PC. So I bought it on Steam and refunded it and bought the PS4 version, which is a bummer because I'm playing at half the frame rate I could have.
Right.
Not thrilled about that, but I mean, I can get through it. It's not my preference, but when the alternative is that literally, like, the controller configuration was just like straight up not working.
It seems like the preferable option.
Like, literally playable versus literally unplayable. Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty well-known issue. If you look through, like, unfortunately negative reviews on Steam, you'll see other people that had the same issue. I don't know if a fix has come from the developer or the community since then. But now that I've also already purchased the game, and it's like still not a cheap game because Activision is a publisher and they generally don't lower the prices of their games very much or very often, I'm not going to buy it again. So yeah, I'll be playing it at 30 FPS on PS4. Well, actually, while we're sort of mentioning that, it is an unlocked frame rate on the PS4. It just runs at and around 30. So from my understanding, actually, on a PS5, it can get
there's hope
into like the 50s, 60s kind of range. I think I remember seeing a Digital Foundry video that covered that. I might want to confirm that information, but
hey, that's pretty good.
I believe that's true. Yeah.
Nice.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's about what I had to say about that one. So
it's funny when you had said
it's time to wrap it up.
Time to wrap it up. It's funny when you said, you know what, similar to your backlog game, like, a Super Nintendo RPG. Let's hear it. And you're like, Sekiro. I was just like, nope, never mind. I was wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. But
fine.
You see what I mean by similar.
No,
it's
definitely.
Similar in that it's something we've both started and
kind of abandoned.
Dropped off on. Yeah.
Yep. There's a lot of games like that. I got a whole shelf full of them.
Yeah.
So that's why I included this section in this. I thought it would be fun to shame ourselves weekly or episodically. And
yeah, absolutely. The one thing I do maybe struggle with this section, actually, and we can let the viewers hear it, is I do sometimes wonder if, like, most of the things on my backlog are there for, like, the same reasons as each other, but it's fun to think really hard about the list and find something that's there for a unique reason. So I actually really like this segment. Yeah,
it doesn't even have to be
it's been
about
a lot of fun.
It doesn't even have to be about, like, why it's there, because it could just be there because, like, I don't have time to play all of Persona 5, for example, right? Like, that's just an ongoing.
You haven't even in my opinion, seen like the essence of that game.
I'm treating it like a very long TV show that I'm watching very slowly. That's how I'm playing it.
Yeah, and that's fine.
Once and again for about an hour or two a week kind of thing. But I guess what I'm saying is like, you can just get into the history of the game too. Talk about why you like it and why you want to play it. It doesn't have to be about why you don't want to play it, which we've done. We've done that.
Well, then, dear listener, maybe you'll hear some different takes on backlog in the future.
Yeah. I guess this was an interesting one. We talked a lot about one topic. We have yet to actually follow the format that we've laid out, but I really thought that this topic
really
deserved a big...
interesting that happened, yeah.
I wonder what brainwave happened that we both thought at the same time. It's funny because as you were saying your topic, it's literally like exactly what I wrote down on my phone. I was like, oh my God, yeah, that is what I want to talk about.
Wow.
Yep. All right.
Wonderful.
Well, everybody, that's been, I guess this is episode 3. Literally right now as we record it, it's not anywhere on the internet. So this is just totally, some form of ego masturbation for us. But hopefully by the time you hear it, it will be on the internet, and we're looking at getting it up there soon. And all I can say is that this has been episode 3. If you want to get in contact with us right now, the only way is through Ben and his social media contact. Ben, if you want to plug that.
Yeah, so twitter.com, my @ is happyphotocopy. I also stream on Twitch, twitch.tv/halffoco, HAFOCO. Yeah,
we should get maybe like a podcast handle or something. We'll sort that out.
We will be creating one, absolutely.
This is episode 3, and this podcast cannot continue.